Before we start our podcast today, we'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting.
The Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to elders, past and present and emerging. Me and others used to describe myself, looking back at that time, as that I had fuck off written across my forehead.
I bet you did.
I did.
I can hear it.
Yeah, I did. And then I didn't for a process of, or I did sometimes still. But it took some time to be able to let that go.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Janine speaking and I'm with
Kevin, and we're here talking about anger and anxiety, I think.
We are. I'm not sure how to start this topic because it's such a big one.
It's very big. It's so big, this is the second time we're doing the starting.
That's true. This is a do-over. Anger and anxiety are like the tip of the iceberg. And this is a model that I often use around the iceberg. If we think about it, there's about 5 to 10% that sits at the top and is seen. And if we're talking about emotions, is expressed. And the rest of the iceberg is down the bottom, which is unseen. And if we're talking about emotions, is unexpressed. And they're the primary emotions. So that if I experience anger and or anxiety, they're secondary and there's a primary emotion that's going on underneath. Things like pain, hurt, disappointment, dismissal, feeling criticised, scared, name some more.
Scared?
Yeah.
So fear is a primary emotion?
Yes, but I would always say fear of.
Okay.
Because there's often so many different types of fear of abandonment, fear of
course it is. We're talking
rejection, fear of annihilation, so many different things.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to open up talking about that.
So, that's quite clear what we're talking about then.
I hope so.
I like that. Thanks, Janine. For me, anger was always the thing. Like, how are you, Kevin? I'm angry. Why are you angry? Oh, I don't know. And it would just go on. I would express myself. I would see myself as being angry. I was an angry person. Except when people said to me, you know, you're an angry person. And I'd say, no, I'm not. Angrily. But it was a long time before I realised coming to see you and other things I was doing. Particularly, I think, when I stopped taking drugs and started to heal after a long relapse, I learned that it wasn't anger, it was something underneath the anger. And that quite often, for me, it was grief. Yeah. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was actually just burying what was going on. Yeah.
Well, I think it served as a protection.
And then it didn't.
And then it didn't as an adult. And that's often we keep those things of childhood around what we've survived with. I can tell you that I experienced myself as an angry person when I was younger as well.
But I was 53 and still angry, or angry again.
Some of us can be very good at keeping our anger. I'm not sure what age I was when I started to realise I'm really angry. And I'd had this adult experience where I was with two of my brothers and something happened between us and there was some conflict, and I spoke up for myself because I started to realise that I was more vulnerable underneath, that anger was this thing that I was used to experiencing and expressing, but I wasn't expressing any of the vulnerable things. And what happened is one of my brothers came back at me really angrily and shut that down very quickly, because that made him incredibly vulnerable to see that he was actually scaring me. And the interesting thing from that point is then I shut that down very quickly in the moment. I got very angry as a response and said, well, what needs to happen now? And moved on from that conflict. Can't remember exactly how it resolved. After that, I started to realise that I was incredibly scared and vulnerable a lot of my growing years, that I'd used anger to protect me, which was a really good thing, just as you described.
Yeah.
And then I needed to go into counselling because I started to realise I was scared all of those years. And so I couldn't give up my anger then. I needed it to protect me. But then I needed to work out how the hell was I going to deal with all this vulnerability, all that fear, and what then was I going to deal with it? How was I going to deal with this?
Yeah.
So it was a whole learning curve for me.
Yeah, I can remember standing outside a meeting and my friend phoned me and he said, so, how did it go? And I said, yeah, it was okay. He said, where are you? And I said, I'm standing outside the meeting. He said, so, oh, okay, I'll get off the phone then. You were chatting with anyone? I said, no one's talking to me. Started to get angry and he said, okay, so are you talking to anyone? No, I'm standing well over out of the way. He didn't say anything.
This was at an NA meeting?
Yeah, so after an NA meeting. He said, so they're probably going to go across the road. It's Saturday night and have a coffee and maybe something to eat. Are you going to go across? And I said, no. And he said, how many people do you think we're going to go? I said, it looks like a 20 or 30 of us. I said, so what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm just going to wait here until they go, then I'm going to drive home. Well, I think it would be a good idea if you joined in. And then we said goodbye. And then this other member came past me and he said, so you're coming over to the cafe, Kevin? And I said, well, he said, come on, and just grabbed me by the elbow and dragged me across the road. Me and others used to describe myself, looking back at that time, as that I had fuck off written across my forehead.
I bet you did.
I did.
I can hear it.
Yeah, I did. And then I didn't for a process of, or I did sometimes still. But it took some time to be able to let that go. Being with those men and women, but for me primarily it was with the men, and they were big tough men and they'd been in prison, and hearing them, seeing them like that, and then hearing them talk about their feelings and hearing them talk about their loved ones and hearing them talk about their children, and I just melt in the seat, if only for a moment. And the moments became longer and longer.
Okay.
I'd hear the women talk about feeling very unsafe coming into the meetings, and then doubly so because it's dominated by men, and then hearing these big men getting up and talking, being so vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that just went, oh my God, I've never heard men talk like that before.
Not an easy process.
And neither had I.
Yeah. And if we think about it, the way we've in society have been with our men is around to deny any vulnerability.
Yeah.
And all we need to do is look at the football field to think about that. If you think about it, if you show any vulnerability on the football field, if somebody's injured, I've noticed that they might be injured in terms of their shoulder, then what happens is the other football players can target that and go in after the shoulder. So men, just as a common experience of my story is seeing that what happens with men is if they show any vulnerability, those around will attack and really put them down. And so we've got a whole lot of learning to do.
Yeah.
As a woman, I think that we're more comfortable with vulnerability because we're often that, if you think about menstruation and pregnancy, and again, because of our sex, that means we can be more vulnerable in terms of we could be violated sexually more easily, and those sorts of things leave us very protective and more prone to anxiety in many ways. So anger and anxiety are one and the same thing.
Yeah.
And they're both those secondary emotions.
Yeah, we've discussed that loads. They are.
Yeah.
It took me a while to get that, but they are. They cover up.
Yeah, they do.
So it's still impressive. Having that experience of, in the end, not just men and women being that vulnerable and relating to what they're talking about, helped me on my journey to find out what those was underneath there, what I'd been suppressing, and led me to come and see you and talk to you about what was going on.
And the journey for that around being with and listening to anger and anxiety, either or, and noticing what's underneath is a journey for me that doesn't end. I'm always assessing or noticing in my body, am I angry? Am I feeling anxious? And then stopping, listening to and what's happening underneath, and then deciding with that piece of information, what do I need to do to resolve this, to heal this, to respond well? And so I'm often thinking about those terms around just stopping and noticing and then working out what I'm going to do.
And it takes some time.
It does.
That takes some time. That's every day. It changes. Day by day, the healing happens, and the ability for me to keep in tune with my body, just like you just said.
So if I was anxious, how would you know? What would I do? You know how we talked about you being frustrated or angry and it takes over?
It's obvious.
Yeah. For anxiety, it's not as obvious as anger, but it still is absolutely impactful because it so impacts me because I can't think. It stops my creativity. It almost blocks some sort of flow with me, so it would absolutely impact you.
It's interesting because you start to do things, like you're restless.
Yeah.
And then your hands move a lot, although sometimes your hands move a lot because you're expressing something.
Yeah.
You'll move around, that kind of thing.
That's what you see, but how does it impact you?
Makes me feel restless too.
Yeah, it has this parallel of impacting you.
I know. Makes me want to control you. Hey, sit back down, stay there, be still, stop fiddling. I can hear somebody from my childhood going, stop fiddling, Kevin. I have no idea who it is, a teacher maybe or someone. Yeah.
Isn't that true? I can hear someone saying, get out of my way, what are you doing? Which in many ways actually creates the anxiety, doesn't it? It keeps
does.
it there.
Yeah, it creates the anxiety in you, creates the anger in me.
And then we get stuck in those secondary emotions.
Yeah.
And I think that's fascinating because often in life, people have learnt within some families, and part of their family culture is this is what we do. We either do all the secondary stuff. We don't do all the softer, more vulnerable feelings where we connect with one another and ourselves. And that's a trap.
I know somebody who would disagree with that.
Who?
Yell. You just go, no, it's fine. You don't need to worry about it. Just listen to me. Do whatever I tell you to do.
So this is where that part of me comes out, which is called stubborn. I was going to talk to you about stubborn today. Actually, I was going to tell our listeners about stubborn.
You're stubborn?
No. Well, yeah. Stubborn is a positive part of myself that I developed at some stage, and I think it was when I was in early stages of counselling and working with people around anger management and behaviour change, where I started to consider that it doesn't matter what the other person's behaviour is, that I'm not going to let their behaviour impact me.
Yeah.
So stubborn decides what kind of behaviour she's going to have, and you can do your little angry dance if you like. Go for it. Do your angry dance, do your anxious dance, whatever. And stubborn is just going to be so grounded and so clear and calm, while angry, anxious over there does their thing. And then I'm not going to be affected. I'm going to keep choosing my behaviours.
Not being pushed around with the wind, not reacting to somebody else. Taking time.
Yeah, and it helps me to notice those spikes of anxiety or anger.
Okay.
You do that anyway. When you talked about that earlier around listening and noticing if yell comes out or if some other part of you is frustrated or angry or anxious, and then stopping and going, what's underneath?
And you talked about it's softer. The primary emotions are softer. And I immediately thought, my inner child, Kev. And that's sort of the role that he plays. That's who he is.
We haven't talked about your inner child here on this podcast
I think
before.
I've been protecting them.
Ah.
It's like a big thing. It's not such a big thing to talk about yell, because it's already happened. People who are listening to our podcast can connect with yell and understand. But talking about my inner child, it's quite difficult. And I feel quite protective. That part of me is the softer side.
Yeah.
So that's the side of me that really needs to know what the feeling is, rather than just accepting whatever's on the surface. Yeah.
And do you think that there's an adult part of you that acknowledges the child part?
Yeah.
And has that relationship with the child part?
I have a conversation often. I had one this morning about, I can't remember exactly, but because the conversation went along the lines of, so I'm not really sure what we're doing here. So I think this was your idea, so I'm just going to bow out and you do it. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't.
Okay, so is that your adult speaking?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's like saying, here, you wanted us to do this, so let's do it, you do it.
Yeah. I have a similar thing, and the reason I asked around the adult, because I've got a clear and strong adult that's been developed over time.
Yeah.
So I might happen to be a counsellor, but I've been working with myself, and in many ways I've certainly had my own counselling for different periods in my life, for some months or whatever's required. And I have a mentor supervisor that I continue to see monthly. He plays a very important role in my life. But just always having that relationship with myself, and I certainly have that adult part and my inner child part. And you're so brave talking about your inner child. I have mine as well, of course, and I often feel that she's protected, tucked in beside my left side, in behind me. So the adult is the one in front.
Yeah.
And then I can choose whether my inner child Neen comes out.
And it makes sense, doesn't it? Because it must make sense in a way even to people who don't acknowledge it. Because it's like we're protecting a part of ourselves that's vulnerable.
Yeah.
And when we're speaking to it, we're speaking to a part of ourselves that's vulnerable but really important. Like my inner child is mostly the part of me that plays, even particularly when I'm alone.
Yeah.
So sings and dances and says, no, you've been working for too long, get up and do something else. And, and has that energy that other people see in me and that I didn't really so much see, as just knew that it was there and it was vital and important. And
That's fascinating.
People say things about me like, you always wear really bright colours. And I thought, yeah, I do. I really like bright colours, and I mostly wear really bright colours. But I think over time I learned that what they were saying they meant. But I think there was something underneath that, which is like, your energy. They were talking about the energy, so that's the energy of my inner child coming out. So when I'm playing basketball and I've got a striped jumper on and bright blue trainers, and that's Kev, and he also wants to play basketball. Yeah.
I think that the inner child only comes out when he or she or they are particularly safe. So as you're talking about it, you're talking about fun-loving, and that inner child will dance or sing or whatever they do. And I think, and that part of me doesn't come out if I'm not feeling safe.
Yeah, so if I'm not feeling okay, if I'm not feeling safe, then it's just like I step in front of my inner child, purposely.
Yeah.
It's like bringing down a grate and just closed for the moment.
Yeah.
But,
So you're saying you protect them, because I almost got the image of them caged, but that's not what you mean, is it? It's more like I said,
like
tucked in behind.
Described,
I get really protective. I almost have this image of myself like an eagle, and she spread her big wings out and the talons come out. Don't you attack my inner child. Don't you come at me, because not only have I got these wings and these talons, if you need, then stubborn takes charge.
Yeah.
And then I'm grounded and it's like, what do we got here?
And talking about those inner parts of myself, inner teenager, which is not so difficult for me to talk about, yell's a lot of fun. But talking about my inner child makes me very vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel vulnerable, and that's okay. In fact, it's more than okay. It's just I need to be aware of what's going on.
It's interesting because we started this podcast talking about anger and anxiety.
We did.
And then you started talking about Kev, your inner child, and it feels really appropriate, but I'm just thinking, how are the two linked? Because they're absolutely linked, because what's underneath the anger and anxiety is those softer feelings. And when we're in touch with those softer feelings, then we can feel more connected to ourselves and those around us. And
that's exactly right. Really important for ourselves, but I think for me, it's also really important that it allows me to be connected to other people and other animals and whatever. And in different cultures, they call it different things. In our culture as well now, they call it being present.
Yeah.
Other people would say that was part of their religion, maybe. I don't know. It is a very spiritual thing.
In psychological terms, it's called mindfulness.
Well, there you go.
I want to be clear about that part of me that I called stubborn. I think that there's a risk that I've presented it in a way that it could give the idea that stubborn is superior. And I don't want to have that in me, and I don't want to present that, because I think if someone presents superior or has a superior part of them, then what they're doing is they're seeing other people as inferior, or there's a one down situation. And the other thing that happens with people who are superior is they often come from an inferior position around, I've got to build myself up, and it's not kind and it's not about equity. And I don't believe in that. I just want to be clear around that, because I think the risks of having the one down or the one-upmanship or any of that is really risky and dangerous business, and that's when you start doing the comparing and the put down, and then we're going to leave people angry, anxious, etc. as well.
That's really clear.
That's making sense?
Yeah, it makes real sense. But I think actually what I heard you say earlier was not that. It was more along the lines of being stubborn because that's looking after you and separating what's going on with whoever you're talking to.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, it is. It's a separation, but a healthy separation. Because often people think that separation is not a good thing. But what we need to separate is the feelings, so that responsibility is clear. What's mine's mine and what's yours is yours.
That's what I heard you say.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, you made it clearer. So, or clear. Or clearer.
I think it's clear.
It's clearly clearer.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Where are we? Anger. Anxiety. It's not really what we've been talking about. We've been talking about what's underneath.
Well, it is, because what we're talking about is once those feelings are identified, then when you stop and go underneath, you can really get some great information about what's happening with you. And I know that if you don't listen to what's underneath, there's no way you can be assertive, because that information that's underneath, that feeling, if I'm feeling ignored, disappointed, hurt, guilty, any primary feelings, and there's lots of them, once I identify them, then I can consider an action. And it might be to tell myself something different, to go and address something with someone, to set a boundary, to realise I've been violated, or to realise I violated someone. So that all feels really important information. And then if I assess it and I haven't done anything or there's nothing to do, then I can let it go. So even the letting go is an action as well.
Yeah.
But you do that, Kevin, don't you? You stop and really consider.
I do.
Yeah.
So that's what I meant. So it's not really about my anger, because I look at the anger and then I throw it to the side and I look at what's underneath.
Yeah.
What I've discovered is that there's always something underneath. There's not just, maybe there's something underneath. There's always a, what do you call it? A primary feeling underneath that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anger is on its own when I need to say something like, hey, you can't run over my cat, that's not okay. I don't know, it's a bad example. Sorry, all our cat lovers out there. But it's something that's happening in front of me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even then, there's something underneath it. But that's something I need to address immediately.
Yeah.
And I do feel anger about it, and I will express my anger.
And you talked about Yell being fun.
Yeah.
And he is. He's a lot of fun. And I think that you and I have developed a relationship with him.
Yep, definitely.
Me as well.
Yeah.
And isn't that fascinating? Because it's not just a part of you, it then becomes a part of our relationship. And the same is true about my inner child. So Neen, she's part of me and we have a lot of fun and she's a part of our relationship as well.
I get to see what she does.
I think Kev comes out and then Neen goes, woohoo! We're playing. We're going to dance. So that's really a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. We're back. Janine's got a story.
Well,
she's going to tell us.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was remembering when I first started running groups, and I think it was one of the first groups I was ever running, and I'd started a 10-week communication course called Build a Better Self, which was just wonderful at the local learning centre. And it was my own course. So I'd written it.
Written? You written?
Oh,
well done.
My goodness.
That's all right. We just made up another word. We're allowed to do that.
Okay, good. Thanks, Kevin,
What does
for
it
that.
mean, though?
I wrote it. Anyway, I wrote my own course and really enjoyed working with people because I really liked having clear examples and getting people up and moving. And so you're using their bodies to help them to learn around assertiveness and begin to listen to themselves.
I like doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was really fun. And I noticed when I was telling the people around, perhaps it was assertiveness, and I'd start to talk and I'd start to tell them a story about myself because I felt like it would help them and it would be relevant to their learning. And I'd start to talk and then I'd notice my body, I would panic and I would stop because I actually felt like I was taking up too much space. I wasn't used to people listening to me and also talking that much. Me, not used to talking that much. And the fascinating thing is my body would panic, so I would get a spike of anxiety and stop. But what I'd noticed is that people would look at me weird and then they'd ask a question, what did you mean, Janine? And it was like, So I'd have to stop, settle my body, and then keep going. They didn't understand what I was actually saying. So I'd finish my story and then they go, and then what I had taught actually makes sense with a story to follow it. And the fascinating thing is I had to teach my body that it was okay to take up some space, that it was okay to talk for a period of time and at this stage it wasn't a very long time. Being that introvert, often introverts will do this, they'll work it out in their head and they eventually go to say something, and the extroverts have all said it, and so then they end up not saying it. And then with my growing up, where there was less listening to any of the children, and I didn't experience being asked how you were and those kinds of questions or interest in me as a child. And so again, there was that child part of me that would panic. I'm taking up too much space, I'm going to take over, I'm too demanding, and so needed to challenge all those feelings of anxiety and pressure around, oh my goodness, I'm doing it wrong, and all of those things that go with that. And it can be overcome.
It can more than be overcome, it can be a learning experience.
Absolutely.
For you, for others around you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's an important story for me. A story of growth, and that I've learnt this. And I had to learn to listen to myself. I'm grateful I did.
It's too easy to get caught up in listening to what other people say or do.
Tell me more.
I have to learn to listen to myself.
Yeah, it's both.
My default has been listening to what's going on around me.
Yeah, it's both. Because if you're listening to what's going on around you and you haven't listened to you, you might not notice that you're getting angry or anxious, and therefore that's impacting you and those around you.
So, yeah, I was
even if you're disappearing,
yeah,
you know, that's still impacting you. And
I certainly get angry.
You want to make a choice around how you respond.
I certainly get angry when I found myself doing things that I really didn't want to do. Yeah. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Our anger and anxiety is something that we can actually learn from and respect. And as we respect those parts of ourselves or that information, if we put it that way, once we respect that information, then we can stop and listen to it, go underneath, and then it can give us great information about what we need to do.
That's good. That's as clear as it needs to be.
Yeah, I think so.
Probably not going to ever be any clearer than that.
Maybe it's as simple, and what I often say is, and as complex as that. Because we know patterns are hard to change, but the compassion around changing any pattern, or the compassion about listening to oneself, is the way through changing. Because if you are angry at yourself, or angry at someone else, then the result's going to be the same. You're either going to get fiery as a result, or you've got to fight back with what you're giving yourself or the other person, and that's not necessarily going to be helpful.
I can remember talking to you about something in one of our sessions, and I was angry about it. Not angry, I was just angry about it, and I was telling you about why I was angry about it. I said, so you must be angry with that as well, about that as well. And you like, nah, yeah, come see, come saw, maybe we're going to do something about that. And you said something interesting. You said, no, not, probably not, or not. What? Why? Well, because I'll just be left with that because there's no way that I can change that. That's outside of my control. Yeah. And that had a great impact on me. I already knew all of that in a way, and yet I didn't.
So I guess I learnt earlier to be comfortable with what I can't change.
Yeah.
And I think powerlessness is one of those feelings that's underneath anger and anxiety that I think is a really important emotion to become familiar with.
But I saw myself, when you said that, I saw myself as someone really constantly fighting something that I can't actually change. So, yeah. And then I started looking around at other areas in my life that I did that were, whatever they were, however big or small they were, and stopped doing it. Allowed it to change.
I remember a particular time with my partner, happens to be my husband, and I remember getting very frustrated and anxious that he wasn't doing the thing that I wanted him to do, and how dare he, and if he just did that, that would be a better outcome for him and therefore me, because I didn't have to hold this anxiety. And the interesting thing, what I was actually doing, I was trying to do it for him in my body.
Yeah.
Could I do that?
No.
Can I actually do it for him? Can I get him to speak up to that person? Can I get him to back himself? Can I get him to back down, or whatever it is? Could I actually do it? No, I'm powerless. And that was a really important emotion. The fascinating thing, Kevin, is when I started to realise that, I actually became somewhat depressed because I realised, I have no power over that. And I actually value that depression because what I actually did was let go. And then what I did is went, the only thing I could change was me.
Yeah, but that's a really important, because we can be an example for those around us because we stop actually trying to control their lives and control everything around us, and we just go, that's outside of us. I can't do that, but what I can do is get on and do the very best I can. That's an example. It's an example to ourselves. It's an example to others as well.
Absolutely. I think it's brilliant modelling, and I want to do that for my children and for those around me. Absolutely. Yeah. I want to be that authentic person in counselling as a counsellor. But the other part of that is I actually want to be empowered as a person just to change me and to let go. I can influence people perhaps, or hopefully if it's good, but again, I'm not wedded to that because I would love to encourage and support people, but if they don't want to listen to me, that's okay.
Yeah.
And I'm comfortable with that. And I feel like in weird ways that it really empowers me to make changes with me. But if I change me, then in some ways you might change, and vice versa.
And I think that does happen.
Yeah, and that's that modelling thing that you're talking about, being that example.
Yeah, I think that happens, yeah. All right. I think we're done. Are we done?
I think we've, again, given it a good go. Interesting thing is we started talking about anger and anxiety, which led to all the important, or not so much important, they're all important, the emotions underneath.
Yeah.
And that, which brings me back to anger and anxiety being valued as really important information, so we can befriend those parts of ourselves and listen to those emotions to give us more information as we can slowly begin to be with those softer parts of ourselves. When my children were young, the first two, and I was starting to become aware of myself, and what I'd realised is I was really angry. And I guess I did the appropriate female thing and was really nice and presentable and contained and smiled and,
so what happened to the anger?
Presented really well. Oh my God, it just went underground, didn't it? It was there. I was presentable enough, and then was spiky to my relationship with Greg.
I can see it.
I wasn't nice to myself, and I didn't feel good. So I might have been nice enough to other people. I was certainly stressed. And so I think what I realised is that I needed to do things differently. I remember going to the doctors one time. I'd brought Rhiannon and Larissa to the doctors. They'd both had colds, and so I was completely exhausted. They were the ages of 3 and 2, and this lady was sitting next to me, and she just went, "Oh, look at your children, aren't they lovely? They're gorgeous at that age. You know where they are all the time." And I'm thinking, I'm exhausted. You have these 2 children.
Yeah.
I'm feeling resentful. I work all the time. I'm tired and the work doesn't stop. And the interesting thing is this woman said to me, "My daughter's in with the doctors." I went, "Oh, okay." And then in the next couple of minutes, this young woman walked out of the doctor's.
Yeah.
And she gave a glaring look at the woman sitting next to me. And the woman sitting next to me stood up and sheepishly walked up to her daughter. And I thought, what? She'd mentioned that it was my 14-year-old daughter. And I'm just thinking, what? I thought, oh, I better relax and I find a way to calm down because this time's going to go very quickly. And I wasn't enjoying my two daughters at that stage. Or I was enjoying parts of them. I certainly wasn't enjoying myself.
Yeah, yeah.
So I had some work to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm certainly glad I did that.
Yeah, direct anger's much better.
It's clearer. It's not much
No,
better.
better's not the right word, perhaps, yeah. I was just remembering my partner and how good she was at it as well, but just doing it, she was expressing it.
Did she ever address you with your anger?
Yeah, she wasn't frightened of me.
I would have been.
I don't know if you would, mate. Oh, yeah, you would have been. But you saw it at an extreme.
Oh, okay.
She saw it, this is when I
was privileged.
Yeah, so I remember when we were in the birthing centre, Chloe was going to be born and we were in the birthing centre when the Queen Vic, the hospital was in where the Queen Vic is now.
Yep.
It was called the Queen Vic, wasn't it? That's right. Yeah. Anyway, there was a birthing centre there, and the only rule was you could stay in the birthing centre, just one nurse, as long as there's no complications, and there was no complications. And boy, did I learn something during that. We had a friend of hers, a close friend of hers there, and I can remember being really concerned towards the end of labour. It was a long labour. I've got in my head that it was 36 hours. But it could be wrong. I don't know. It's a long time.
Yep.
Yeah. And so towards the end of it, Gillian's sitting on the floor in the dining room in this birthing centre, and she's howling in pain. So I ran back into the bedroom and I got the little canister with the gas thing and I took it over and gave it to her and stepped back. And she looked at it, picked it up and held it up my head and shouted, "That's no good. It doesn't work." And all sorts of other things which I won't repeat here. And then having Chloe as a baby back home, you don't know how it's going to be. And being woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's your turn. Really? Yeah, it's your turn. So, wow.
Sounds like you coped with those things better at that time than you did later on with your adult life.
Well, that was my adult life.
I meant your
34.
Older adult life.
Older adult life, yeah. It's, I guess, when you're with somebody who knows who they are and knows what they want and what they don't want.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering...
It's a massive impact.
Also, you were resolving some of the past stuff.
And
healing. And so...
Stuffed it up though, but yeah, starting to.
But often in that whole process of recovering, and I think about my own self in terms of that anger, that first realisation of anger and anxiety and just being an absolute stress bucket, then trying to resolve that meant that I was incredibly vulnerable in that process. And sometimes the awareness of it means that it feels like a backward step. It feels like I'm sensitive to everything and exhausted, and it's really terrifying at first because in order to change a pattern, you've got to push yourself to what's uncomfortable.
Got to know that it's there.
Yeah, true.
I can remember a long time before that with Gillian again, and we went out somewhere in London. We went to the theatre. I can't remember what we saw. It doesn't matter. We'd had a good night and we were on our own. We'd taken the car into central London and we're driving back, and my anger must have been so suppressed, just out of the blue, no warning at all. I pulled over to the curb and made her get out the car and drove off.
Oh.
There wasn't any argument or anything. There was later, I can tell you. And I drove off down the road and I thought, wow, what did I just do? So I went back and it was too late. She got a taxi. She was gone.
Oh.
So I went home. So the suppression of anger
Yeah.
is sometimes worse than the actual anger.
Okay,
Well, yeah.
yes. Now you've reminded me, in the men's groups, when I've worked around men's behaviour change and I've been facilitating those groups, I would be more comfortable with the men if they spoke out with their anger, however it was expressed, in order to work with it and to be with it and to support them to be with it. Because if they didn't express it, often it's there anyway, you can feel it.
Yeah.
And if we're expressing it, I'm not saying this correctly.
You were.
Well,
now you've stopped.
No, it's just some ways of working with groups can be so prescriptive as we're going to do this. And what happens is it actually stops that expression of the anger, or there's so much information and less experiential learning that happens with some of the groups. And there's a risk to that. Because if the men don't express their truth, which is, I can't stand that, or I can't stand them, or I'm pissed off about whatever, if they don't get to express that, then it goes underground. And that underground stuff will get expressed one way or another, and it's often with their partner or their family at home.
It comes out.
So I want it to come out. And when I cheekily said to you that I'd faced your anger, and I said it's a privilege, it is. Because then it comes out, and that...
Even that was better than me sitting down there for another X months or whatever, and it's leaking out, and it's leaking out everywhere in my life.
Yeah. Now, I don't mean that it's permission for everybody to anger all over them.
It wasn't permission for me. There was a recognition that it wasn't okay. It was impacting you.
Yeah.
Which is great.
But it was the working through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was the first time I went, oh, wow, my anger, even though I'm not angry at someone else, can actually hurt them.
Yeah. And it was hurting you.
It was hurting me and it was hurting you, and it wasn't. I was like, oh no, it's okay. I'm not angry at you, but it was still hurting you. Yeah. That was a new concept for me.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by this topic because it's reminding me of so many stories that I want to tell the listeners, and I'm reminded that both of us have worked really hard on ourselves and also with each other around these important emotions that have other primary emotions underneath them. And that working through and those conversations have been really important and hard to do at times.
Yeah. I've got an announcement.
Yeah?
Yeah. So, we're going to be having a guest speaker soon.
We are.
We are.
Look out.
Watch out for our guest speaker.
Yeah, we're not going to tell you who this guest speaker is.
And we're not going to tell you what it's about either. But the topic will be.
Sounds cool.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to hearing who it is and what we're going to be talking about.
You can't. That's ridiculous. In fact, we just did it. Okay.
What's it about? Well, let's maybe.
You're going to give them a clue, are you?
No.
No.
We'll just leave them curious.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic, though.
Curiosity
Yeah.
is the key to being non-anxious and non-angry.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I think we'll leave it there.
I think so.
Thanks very much for listening and being with us again, and I hope you've enjoyed our podcast. It's certainly fun talking with you, Kevin, and I hope we encourage the listeners out there.
Yes. Keep listening and tell everybody. Quick, now.
Oh, you can if you want.
What's that? So laid back. No, tell them now. Right now. Now. All right. Yeah, thank you. And see you soon.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.